It encompasses 946 acres on what was the original Rock Island. The importance of this land was identified as early as 1809, when it was set aside as a federal military reservation by an act of Congress and solidified in 1816 with the construction of Fort Armstrong. During the Civil War, the island was home to a prison camp for captured Confederate soldiers. Established as both an arsenal and a center for the manufacture of weaponry and munitions, today it provides manufacturing, logistics, and base support services for the armed forces, and it remains the proud centerpiece of the Quad Cities community. Good evening, I'm Steve Long. Welcome to the Rock Island Arsenal. Tonight we're taking you inside the gates of this magnificent facility to share in its history and its beauty. You'll see the arsenal like you've never seen it before.
This is a CBS 4 News special, Rock Island Arsenal Inside the Gates, brought to you in part by the Rock Island Arsenal Federal Credit Union.
One building on the arsenal was designed and built as the residence for the highest-ranking officer on the base, but most know it simply as Quarters 1.
It was designed to have about 50 rooms that cover 20,000 square feet.
That's a big house. How big?
It was the second largest single-family dwelling owned by the U.S. government, the largest being the White House.
Whether looking up or looking down, treats for the eyes surround you.
The flooring is alternating oak and walnut. There's very elaborate plaster work on the ceilings. The railing's even pegged.
Check out the fancy ironwork on the front porch.
That was all constructed here from melted down horseshoes, mule shoes, and cannonballs.
Cannonballs left over from the Civil War. And it doesn't look like it now, but this was a courtroom.
That was the 1870s, 80s, 90s. It would have been the soldiers who were stationed here, maybe for desertion or for not following orders.
The third floor was temporary housing for newly arriving soldiers and their families.
I think it was a needed facility for the western edge of the frontier.
But before the elegant family home he planned was complete, Rodman died in 1871. You could say the father of the Rock Island Arsenal left quite a gift for the men who followed in his footsteps. You can still see Quarters 1 standing strong today, but there's a big piece of the arsenal's history you can't see. That's because it was destroyed in what turned out to be a major scandal. History was made on April 22, 1856, when the first railroad bridge to cross the Mississippi officially opened, allowing trains to travel from Rock Island to Davenport.
It was the largest and heaviest drawspan bridge in the world at that time.
But beneath the smooth surface of the Mississippi, tensions churned, and not just between the North and South. And trouble was on the way in the form of a paddle wheel riverboat named the Effie Afton, which for some unknown reason was heading upstream.
They started steaming north of St. Louis with no cargo and no established destination logged.
The Afton reached Rock Island May 5th. The next day, they pulled out into river traffic on its final voyage.
They challenged another boat to a race.
They passed through the drawspan, but about 200 feet upstream, the side paddle wheel stopped working, and the Afton floated backward with the current.
Rams into one of the piers of the bridge, bounces off that, rams into another pier of the bridge. According to the captain and crew, a stove overturned during this collision, setting the boat on fire. Within 5 minutes, the boat had burned down to the waterline and set the bridge on fire.
The drawspan on the brand new bridge was a total loss.
When the drawspan fell into the river, all of the riverboats on the river started tooting their horns in celebration that the bridge had been destroyed.
So why the celebration? The railroad was competition for steamboats, both north and south. But the next competition would be in the courtroom. Riverboats saw the railroad as direct competition.
Remember, the only way to get across the river up until that point was to get on a boat.
And their high-stakes battle for business was moving full steam ahead.
Immediately, the owners of the boat backed financially by the St. Louis Chamber of Commerce, filed suit against the Rock Island Bridge Company.
The trial would be held in Chicago. The boat owners not only wanted to be paid for their losses, but their high-powered lawyers also asked the courts to order the destruction of the bridge as an impediment to river travel. But the bridge company brought in their own high-powered attorneys, including a young man by the name of Abraham Lincoln. He had experience with previous river interest trials and prepared well for this one.
Lincoln came to Rock Island and inspected the currents. He also consulted many engineers who would testify in the trial on behalf of the bridge company.
Engineers testifying for the boat company said the bridge was dangerous, but they'd never seen it. Lincoln's side takes advantage.
The railroad company brings in one engineer after another, every single one of whom had been to the bridge, had tested the currents.
The railroad side had done their homework.
Another interesting thing that came out in the trial is that the F.E. Afton was insured only for fire, which is a little unusual.
Interesting, because it was when the F.E. Afton caught fire that the bridge's drawspan was destroyed by flames. During closing arguments, Lincoln spoke for 2 days. He acknowledged the value of steamboats.
But he said, you know, railroads are there too, and railroads have just as much right to go east and west as riverboats do to go north and south.
Lincoln said it was either gross negligence by the captain or a deliberate act. The jury was deadlocked. The judge threw the trial out.
It's seen as a huge deal for Abraham Lincoln, that this was a very prominent trial.
The bridge had been repaired and was back in action, and it was okay to stay for the time being. But the boat owners didn't give up.
It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, by which time Lincoln was President of the United States.
The Supreme Court ultimately sided with the bridge company. And just like that, it was over. The railroad had won. And speaking of bridges, it's a road many of you travel every day. But there's a few things you may not know about the government bridge. And later, you see it standing proud overlooking the island. We'll show you the famous clock tower like you've never seen it before. Stay with us. Welcome back to Rock Island Arsenal Inside the Gates. I'm Steve Long. Made of solid steel, the government bridge is an icon. Built in 1896, it's more burly than beautiful and shares much in common with its predecessor.
So we have the rail on the top like it is today, and we had wagon place on the bottom. So that was the first time when that bridge opened in 72 that you could actually take your wagon across the river without having to use a ferry.
When the 1872 bridge became obsolete, they replaced it with the one we use today.
The pierings, actually the support structures go down to the bedrock and come up to the support of the bridge across those 5 spans you see there. Those are the ones that were placed in 1872.
The new bridge opened in 1896.
So if you don't like, the fact that this bridge is 110, 15 years old, well, you're not going to like the fact that the pierings are about 140 years old.
Built to last through hot summers and bitter winters, it's still rock solid, but it's not free.
The garrison spends about $700,000 a year on maintenance on that bridge, and it will last forever. They do all kinds of maintenance on it to make sure it continues to run.
It's not only durable, but distinctive.
What's really interesting about this bridge, I think, is it's only one of 2 in the world that turns 360 degrees both ways. So that span can follow a barge through both directions.
The goal is to get the swing span opened and closed as quickly as possible, minimizing delays to road traffic.
The span itself is 1,250 tons, and that's just the swing span itself. So it's a very heavy, which makes it even more impressive that a 56 horsepower engine turns it.
Glitzy and glamorous? No. High quality and historic? No question. The river has always played a big role in our community, and especially for the Arsenal. And that brings us to something you probably haven't given too much thought to. But without it, the mighty Mississippi would be a mighty big mess. It strikes a majestic profile, stretching from Arsenal Island to Davenport. But it's more than just a pretty face.
Its job is to hold back water and make the river deep enough for navigation.
And it's not only what it does, but how it does it.
We are actually the largest roller dam in the world, and the reason for that is because we actually have our dam consisting all of roller gates.
In all, the dam has 11 roller gates. So, what's a roller gate?
It's basically a round tube that is suspended between two control buildings.
Completed in 1934, it's a sight to behold, but only from a safe distance.
We want to, keep people out of the restricted areas, 600 feet in front of and 150 feet below.
Just below the dam is a spinning, spitting torrent of water, referred to as the drowning machine. One look and you can see why. Just above the dam,
those are the last chance lines over there.
There's a series of ropes hanging beneath the Arsenal Bridge.
If you get to the dam, your chances are not so good. We want you to just stay in your boat, stay with your vessel, grab onto one of those ropes and just hold on tight, and somebody will come on out and assist you and help pull you to safety.
Both dangerous and dazzling, the first dam built across the upper Mississippi is best handled with a healthy dose of respect. It's a majestic landmark that has stood the test of time. Tonight we're not just taking you inside the gates, we're taking you inside the clock tower at the Rock Island Arsenal. You could say this place is solid as a rock. Using local limestone from LeClaire, Iowa, it was the island's first permanent government building.
The construction was interrupted during 1864 when there was no water in the Mississippi River, so they couldn't bring down the limestone blocks, float them down the river to the construction site.
Finally finished in 1867, it was a storage building for supplies like ammunition, canteens, and uniforms to be sent out to the frontier, helping the military with westward expansion. But it's not the function of the building that catches the eye. It's the faces at the top of the tower.
This floor was built to house the clock, which provides the mechanisms to turn the dials on the four faces on each side of the tower.
As amazing as it is to see the tower from the inside out, there's more. How many people get to go up and see the bell up here?
Not very many. Rarely do we even go up here, and more rarely do we bring visitors up here.
The view from the roof takes your breath away, as does the chime of this massive bell. For 145 years, the clock tower's been keeping time, and supported by those thick walls of limestone, the bell may well toll here for 145 more. You may be thinking to yourself, we're talking about the Rock Island Arsenal, so where are the weapons? When we come back, a gun that's loaded with a lively legacy. And what would guns be without targets? Well, they're flying off the shelves here and headed all over the world. Stay with us. Welcome back. Just after the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, the Rock Island Arsenal got the opportunity to produce a rifle that would end up in the hands of thousands of U.S. soldiers. The Springfield Model 1903 rifle is a history buff's bullseye.
The Model 1903 was one of the primary weapons used by soldiers or doughboys during the First World War.
But its path to the rifle rack of fame began well before the war.
The rifle is called the Springfield because it actually was designed and originally produced at Springfield, Massachusetts at Springfield Armory.
In 1904, the folks in Washington decided to make the rifle in Rock Island as well. In fact, the very room where the museum is now was once loaded with machinery, one of two buildings here used to make the famous rifle.
Approximately 235,000 were manufactured from 1904 to 1913, and then another 4,000 were manufactured during World War I. We don't open the display case very often at all.
For good reason.
This is serial number 1 for Rock Island Arsenal.
The Springfield 1903 design borrows heavily from the design of the K98 Mauser rifle.
So what's the K98 Mauser? It's the primary rifle used by our enemy in the war, Germany. Turns out we were using their patents without permission.
Mauser did take us to court, and we lost the case. We had to pay royalties to the Mauser Rifle Company for using their patents. And we did that all the way through World War I.
That's right. We were fighting the Germans, paying them money during the war, and using their own technology against them. In the end, those rifles made here in Rock Island helped the U.S. prevail in the First World War. And while the Springfield rifle is a thing of the past, every member of the U.S. Armed Forces still uses a product made here and only here.
Nobody. No one else prints DoD targets. Just Rock Island Arsenal.
On the ground floor of an historic stone shop built in the 1870s,
this is the rifle target. It's a medium-range rifle target, not the long range, but medium range.
2 presses print. And print. And print some more.
We produce a lot of targets.
They started printing targets back in the 1880s.
We had different weapons then, and as new weapons come online, we develop new targets to go with them.
They're training aids for the troops.
Thus far, no one's come up with a better way than a paper target, punching holes in it with a rifle or a pistol.
All these targets printed using just 2 presses. This one's from 1958.
And it was built in 3 parts by 3 different vendors, and it was brought online on site. There is no other press like it in the world that I'm aware of.
Built for one purpose, printing targets.
This is the section that actually parts the paper and makes an individual target. Those knives are made specifically for this press.
Their other press is newer, sort of.
This is a 1964 Mealy.
Instead of printing off a rubber stamp, it uses a steel plate with a raised image.
These are long-run plates. We'll get several million images off each one of these plates.
Images that could end up anywhere across the globe, but all come hot off the press. Right here at the Rock Island Arsenal. Much of the history of the Rock Island Arsenal is on display at the museum. When we come back, why the public almost lost the chance to see any of it. And later, speaking of history, one soldier's story speaks volumes. Welcome back to Rock Island Arsenal Inside the Gates. I'm Steve Long. You may have visited the museum here on Arsenal Island, but did you know there's so much history that only about 3% of the museum's collection is actually on display? It's like climbing inside a treasure chest of military memorabilia.
I always refer to our gun collection as the carrot. That's the carrot that brings people here.
After all, they have about 1,200 guns on display, dating back to America's battle for independence.
One of the Revolutionary War items that we have on display is a wall gun, and the wall gun was used on the walls of forts.
And check out this commemorative piece.
The company that manufactured those machine guns just took used parts and gold-plated them.
If guns are the carrot, the rest is the main course. And the second most popular exhibit?
The horse.
The horse that we have on display was actually part of the government display at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904.
A display about horses used to pull an artillery piece.
During World War I and during World War II, the museum was packed up and closed to the public because they needed these areas for manufacturing purposes.
But after World War I, this treasure chest was almost closed for good.
Museums can be expensive, and the commanding officer of Rock Island Arsenal at that time decided he wasn't going to reopen the museum. The Smithsonian actually came and looked through the collection and selected things for Washington, D.C.
But she says the community was upset and looked to area lawmakers for help.
Their congressman fought to reopen the museum. The museum was reopened in 1919.
What began in 1905 has survived its own battles, and over a century later, this museum is still paying tribute to America's military. You can learn a lot at the museum, but the real history of the Rock Island Arsenal lies deep within the men and women who have served here. 53-year-old Scott Flugel has been in the military since 1978.
I started out in the United States Coast Guard out on the West Coast. I became a storekeeper 3rd class.
In the 80s, he served in the Air Guard and then became an infantry officer in the Army, but he was never deployed. He became a chaplain in 1995, and it was that role that proved most dangerous. In 2003, he was sent to Kabul, Afghanistan.
When I got there, it was in the middle of the night, of course. for safety and security.
He spent about 6 months there at Camp Phoenix.
We had a chapel there. I set up the first chapel, and that's pretty neat to be able to do.
Home safely in 2003, deployed again in 2004.
One of my daughters, my youngest, started crying, and she was like, "I don't want you to go."
This time, it was Iraq.
I lost one soldier and one interpreter during that deployment.
That's got to be tough on you.
It is, sir. It very much is.
It looks like it's still tough on you.
Oh, yeah.
As a chaplain, his job was helping soldiers work through tough times and stay close to their faith. In 2005, he came home, but violence raged on, and 2006 to 2007 were rough years.
I lost about 15 soldiers in my battalion.
He wasn't there then, but the loss hit hard.
A lot of them were killed in an action in what some call the Sunni Triangle or the Triangle of Death in Iraq.
And the emotions are still raw.
I go back thinking, what was the last thing I said to First Sergeant? What was the last word, conversation I had with my medic that was killed?
So when he talks to soldiers, he knows where they're coming from.
Best thing you can do is listen. Doesn't matter if you know what they're going through or not, but listen. And let us tell our stories.
Stationed at Rock Island Arsenal since 2010, he'll retire this March with memories of a career that began nearly 35 years ago. From an extraordinary home to a battle over a bridge, from rifles used to save the world from tyranny, to one man's battle to bring faith to those in combat. There's no question the Rock Island Arsenal is rich with history, and we've only scratched the surface. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we invite you to join us every Thursday night on 10 at 10 on CBS 4 as we continue to explore the Rock Island Arsenal inside the gates. I'm Steve Long. From all of us here at CBS 4, thank you and good night.
This CBS 4 News special has been brought to you in part by the Rock Island Arsenal Federal Credit Union.